I feel like I talked about this game pretty recently. Almost barely any time has passed, maybe like 5 minutes. And if you feel the same way, that's because really not that much time has passed at all. But either way, Persona 5 The Phantom X is headed, or is already in, its 2.0 release, a whole 3 months after the game has launched. A sign of things to come? Maybe? Maybe not? Not much, to be honest. 2.0 didn't bring about a ton of new changes for the game. A lot of you watching probably don't even play the game and are just waiting for global. Well, the good news is that we've gotten our first mention of the official global release for this game since the game came out in China, Korea, and Taiwan. It was in a Bilibili Q&A with the producers. Basically with them stating that global is their current focus. The question was about potential console ports for this game, which they said will not start development until global is ready to go, or at some point in a later time. Otherwise, they also mentioned being interested in planning collaborations with Persona 5 Royal, Persona 3 Reload, and Persona 4 Golden in the future. So I guess that means the current Persona 5 collab is literally for base Persona 5. Not surprising, I guess, but it's weird how Atlus keeps trying to make this distinction between 5 and 5R, as if 90% of the game isn't exactly the same. Regardless, that's where they stand on releases right now.
There is just news. There is no good or bad.
Generally, the best news we could have gotten at this point is that they are planning and still are working on the global launch. It likely means that the overall earnings have been profitable, and that over the past 3 months the game has seen good enough returns to keep it going at least for a while. The last thing I need right now is to hear this game isn't doing well, because by all accounts, it isn't bad. According to Sensor Tower, it seems that the game did pretty well on launch and has dwindled down a little bit after, which I think is pretty normal for gacha games. Launch month is where all the hype is, and people are spending for stronger characters to clear content when they hit walls, and as we progress later into the game's life, a lot of players will be well off enough to clear content without needing to drop a ton of money.
Rather than explain it with words, I'd like you to actually see this new reality with your own eyes.
Now, moving away from the actual news stuff, Persona 5X is still good. It's not perfect by any means. In fact, I have several issues with the existing game, but that doesn't make it bad. While it does its best to emulate the Persona 5 experience as a whole, with pretty up-to-par graphics, similar UI design, and of course, pretty much the same gameplay loop, it's still almost constantly reminding you that it still is a mobile game. Unlike Genshin and Star Rail, which tune down the UI elements on screen, P5X feels the need to constantly be showing you some elements like your stamina and your event or action points. Things like currency is hidden only to be shown in the summoning screen, but it's still something I don't really need to see all the time. The only other thing is that this game does lack the level of Atlus polish you see on Atlus games. It just feels a little bit rough. There's still lag between a lot of transitions, and the game has to also speak to the server for each turn in a fight, which means that if you break connection, sometimes the game is just going to boot you out mid-battle. Again, none of this is game-breaking, and some of it has to do with my own geographic location, but it can get a bit tiring to play this game for longer stretches. Putting that aside, the gameplay is still satisfying, and as I said in my original review, there are things in the battle system that I think this game does better than the actual main series. Making enemies not get instantly down from hitting their weaknesses provides a new sense of strategy, and it can make the game more challenging. Adding optional fights in dungeons that we can come back to do later is something P5 also lacked. There's a lot to love here, and I'm not going to touch much on the story due to it being machine translated, and that doesn't really give me all the context I need. Pronouns can be switched around sometimes, which means that sometimes a character will say he instead of she, but sometimes it's you instead of I or we instead of them. A lot of inferring happening here while I'm playing and reading the story dialogue, and I think that's a problem when you're trying to understand the story. And of course, the big one. I was hoping that 2.0 would introduce one big change to the story, that whoever was in charge of directing the music usage would stop using Wicked Plan like it's the only song they have. Wicked Plan is not a song that should be used for casual hangouts, major story events, or emotional scenes. Yet for some reason, Perfect World Games is adamant about using this song for almost all of these. It becomes a bit jarring after a while, and it feels like they've toned it back a bit but are still using this song way too often. There are over 100 songs in the Persona 5 soundtrack, and to use Wicked Plan as often as they are is just kind of damaging the game's tone and atmosphere. There's also a bug where sometimes it keeps playing after a cutscene ends, so yeah.
So much of this shit makes no sense, but we'll cover it later.
So between versions 1.x and 2.0, not all that much has changed. There's a lot of added content, adjustments to how some mechanics work, and things that make the game overall more pleasant. But most of the good and bad has stayed between these updates. I really hope this game continues to progress and grow, and that we get some true QOL updates, which we have gotten some, but I'd like a few more. I also, just a personal thing, think that the OC gacha units being added are kind of hard to find interesting because most of them don't get introduced until the patch they're released in, and sometimes they wind up being barely interactable within that patch. The amount of content this game has to offer is kind of staggering though, and keeping up with the 2-week patch cycle is draining. I know some people said in my last video that it felt like the story was progressing too slow, but I honestly don't agree. There's a lot coming out constantly, and I don't personally want to be spending all my time playing this game. But that's just my opinion. So let me know what you think of P5X, and if you're interested in its global release in the comments down below. As always, you can leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Atlas, Persona, and anime RPG related. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
我が輩がお前らを支えてやる。ありがとう。
引くわけねえだろクソが。